So I simply asked a question to God. And I said, if you will just tell me what caused this, I will change. And without hesitation, I heard 3 words spoken to me by God. He said, it's your diet. So I left my second reconstructive surgery, and I was full of hope because I knew God had given me some clear instructions. In those 3 words, it's your diet, it came crashing down on me like I suddenly knew everything I needed to do. See, before I had entered into the surgeries, I had spent the previous year doing tons of research. And I'm not a doctor, and I know that there are so many different protocols and so many different ways to do things. But from the studies that I had done, what I determined was there were a couple of things that would for sure contribute to cancer growth. One of them being refined sugar. Really, any kind of sugar, but I knew for sure processed and refined sugar was a big deal. And I would say up until this point, that was probably 50% or more, maybe 75% of my diet. Everything I was eating either had hidden sugars in it or just blatantly obvious sugars in it because I was addicted to sugar. I was the kind of person that I needed a dessert after every single thing I ate to kind of cleanse my palate. That would be what I would say, right? And I mean, sometimes it would be like, who even needs dinner? Let's just get a piece of cake. And I know, like, looking back on it, it seems so ridiculous, but you get in this cycle, this vicious cycle of really addiction to the food. And you don't think straight and you don't realize what you're doing or how it's affecting you because it's just one meal, one treat, one dessert, and I would tell myself this. I would say, well, I only eat desserts on special days and today's a special day. And I would just like kind of laugh it off. And in fact, one of my really good friends, he was teaching with me at the time. And over the course of about 6 months, he gained like 30 or 40 pounds. And he was like, Pratt, you did this to me. I'm like, how did I do it to you? What did I do? And he's like, because you eat all the time. Like, you always want to go out to eat. And I never go out to eat. And now I go out to eat just to hang out with you. And I've gained 30 pounds. And we kind of made a joke about it. But it was the condition that I was in. And, the funny thing was I carried myself well. Like, I didn't look overweight. I didn't look unhealthy. But I had created an environment of toxicity. So I knew the sugar was an issue. And then the second thing that I had studied was that cancer thrives in an acidic environment, but it cannot thrive in an alkaline environment. So through my research, I found that a major contributor to an acidic diet was animal products. Makes sense because they're dead when you eat them. And so I kind of just did my all or nothing personality and went in and said, okay, the diet that I'm currently on is one full of sugar, based 99% in animal products. I don't eat any fruits or vegetables, and it's all processed or ultra processed. So I'm going to do a complete 180. I'm going to go a completely different direction, and I'm going to give it all up. Instead, I'm going to stop eating everything I eat, and I'm going to eat the things I don't eat. So that day, I made up my mind after God spoke to me, it's your diet. I made up my mind, I'm making a change. And so I flipped the switch and I became 100% plant-based. So then I began this new journey, right? Because now I don't know what to cook. I don't know what to eat, but I knew I couldn't go back to those things. And so, I started with some simple things, maybe like some vegetable soup or, just like a pasta or something like that. But, that of course gets boring. And so then I started experimenting and trying new foods, and I love to cook. So I decided, you know what, let me get in the kitchen and be creative, and I'll try to come up with all my favorites and turn them into a plant-based version. So I found myself going back down that path of processed food because, you can get to the grocery store quickly and find all kinds of plant-based or vegan chicken nuggets and hamburgers and you name it, they've turned it into a plant-based version. But that stuff's not good for you either. And I quickly began to recognize that because I wasn't feeling that great. So I started going into a whole food plant-based diet where I stopped eating the processed food and I just started eating whole foods. So I was on the road to recovery, and it took me about 2 or 3 months. But this time, thankfully, the skin graft was not rejected by my body, and my skin started to, grow back. I had a pretty ugly scar that I was dealing with, but things were on the mend, and I was feeling better. And the crazy thing was, just by switching my diet, I didn't exercise because I really couldn't because I was, recovering from the surgeries and things. I actually, within 2 months, I lost 60 pounds just by switching my diet to whole food plant-based. And so I was feeling better. I was looking better. I was having more energy. And I was like, this is it. This is the key to my healing. It was 100% my nutrition. And so life kind of resumed and things got better. I actually ended up getting a promotion in my job. I left the band directing world so that way I wasn't in such high levels of stress and long hours. And I went into administration. And I really was starting to find my way and get my health back on track. And I was embracing this new whole food plant-based lifestyle. And people started asking me about it. They were like, well, what do you eat? And you look so much better. And, wow, you really made changes. So I started kind of sharing what I was learning and teaching people some of my recipes. And it just really became this fun and energizing lifestyle for me. And so things were going really well. And then fast forward about 2 years. In 2021, we're all very familiar with the worldwide lockdowns that took place. But that was the year that changed my life forever. But not necessarily because of the worldwide crisis, but because of my own personal crisis. So I was working from home, as most people were, and being an administrator working from home, I oversaw all digital learning for my district. And so up until this point, digital learning was kind of like this new thing. It was kind of a novelty, and I had been hired to really pilot a program to really help teachers embrace digital instruction. And we were going to kind of roll it out over a 2 or 3 year period and really turn it into something very innovative and cutting edge. Of course, the lockdowns happened and suddenly no one can go to school. So I got a call from my superintendent and he said, remember that thing we were working on and we were going to do it in the next 2 years? I need it done by next week. And suddenly I found myself in a position where I'm now working 60 hours a week again, trying to roll this out. And it was okay because I enjoyed the work. I got to be at home, taking breaks when I needed to. And we got it rolled out. We got the teachers on board. Kids started learning again. It was successful. But little did I know that there was a storm that was brewing on the horizon of my life. So in June of 2021, I was working from home. I was actually on a phone call at the time. And I was upstairs. We had kind of a built-out attic that was turned into my office, and my family was downstairs. We had just had our third child, and so she was a newborn, and then my other 2 daughters were playing, and it was just a normal day. And as I was on the phone, I heard some commotion. I heard like some loud banging noises downstairs. I didn't think too much of it because, hey, I have kids and this happens. But it kept getting louder and more frequent. And I remember thinking, what is going on? What are they doing? So the staircase that went upstairs, it was kind of one of those staircases that made like an L. So it had a very hard 90-degree angle to where when you open the door, you cannot see downstairs without walking halfway down. So I opened the door, and as soon as I opened the door, I heard my wife say my name. And she said my name in a tone that when you hear it, you know things are not right. And at that moment, we both realized that I thought they were making the noise and she thought I was making the noise. And neither one of us were making the banging noises. So I ran downstairs and my wife grabbed my children in a whirlwind and took them to a closet. And as I turned the corner, I realized there was a man out of his mind standing on my back patio, beating in the glass to our door. I would like to say that in that moment I froze, because your brain doesn't even process what's going on. But I didn't freeze. Thankfully, my body just went into action. See, we lived kind of in a secluded area, fenced in. The only way in and out of our property was through a locked gate. And for the most part, we didn't lock doors, especially during the day. And so I immediately ran and started locking all the doors. And when I made it to the back door where this man was, I had a giant rolling craft table that we used for art projects. And I immediately ran and rolled it in front of the door to block the door, because at this point he had taken a very heavy concrete bottomed working lamp that was on our back porch, and he was beating in the door and had broken the glass. Thankfully, he was so on drugs and out of his mind that he didn't even realize he had broken the glass, or he would have come right in. At this moment, your mind is racing, like, how is this even happening? Where did this person come from? So I called my next door neighbors, and by the grace of God, they were home. And immediately they came out and they distracted this guy from our house. They detained him. Thankfully, my next door neighbor, one of them was a police officer, so she knew exactly what to do. And although she was off duty at the time, she had the training to deal with him. We called 911. It took almost 20 to 30 minutes for any law enforcement to actually be there. And at that point, they arrested him, and it took two grown men picking him up and carrying him and putting him in the police car because he was not willing to go. And as that police car was driving off, you have that moment where you realize my entire life was almost just destroyed. You see, he was crazy. He thought that it was his house. He thought he had the right to be there, and he was trying to break in to what he thought was his house. You know, our lives are so fragile. And in a moment, the most unthinkable things can happen that will forever change the trajectory of our lives. And so, you know, we kind of got everything done, and yes, there was damage to the house, but that was all repairable. But as I was going to bed that night and everything kind of calmed down, you know, suddenly that fear sets in. You know, is someone out there? You know, are they going to break in while we're sleeping? Like, your mind just goes crazy. And I realized we couldn't be here anymore. That was just for us. You know, a lot of people may say, you know, that's crazy. How could you just leave everything you have? But for us, it was time. It was time for us to leave. And so we did just that. And within about 2 weeks, I had resigned from my job, found a new job, and we moved 2 hours away. I'm telling you this part of my story because I want you to understand that I'm not just speaking to nutrition when it comes to my story, but now I'm diving into the emotional toll that sometimes we go through. For most of my life, I had lived next door to my family. Maybe it's just a Texas thing, but we stay near to one another. And so that is a comfort because you always have someone there for you. You always have someone to depend on. It's not that we get in each other's hair, but it's great to know that you have people there who love you and care about you and that you can turn to in any time, whether it be good or bad. So my family and I, we left, and this was our first time since I had been married and had kids to be completely on our own. And, that was fine. That didn't bother me. But what we were about to embark on was not what we expected. So let me tell you a little bit about a small coastal town in Texas. The job that I found, it was on the coast, the Texas coast, because we had discussed as a family one day buying some beachfront property or something near the beach and kind of like living there, fishing, relaxing, enjoying, just nature. And we were kind of beach people. We like it, right? So we'd always wanted that. And so we said, this might be the opportunity. So I found a job in a really small community that was a beach community. And we thought this would be super. So we kind of tested the waters. We went down, we found a house to rent. And the interesting thing was the school district that I was working for, they had a program for people who were in transition, moving long distances, where they actually owned some homes in one of the local towns, and they would rent them at a discounted rate for teachers in transition up to a year to kind of help you get yourself established, which was an amazing opportunity. So we took advantage of that. And we were able to get I think it was like a 2,200 square foot home. And I think we were only paying like $600 a month, which is just unbelievable, right? So it was great. And so we get there, we move in, things are looking good, we're enjoying it. But then all of a sudden, like these really weird things happen. And whenever you rent an older house, you would expect there are going to be things that happen. Like, for example, whenever we would turn on the water would come out with a very orange to brown tint, and so we kind of thought, hey, maybe it's old pipes, maybe there's some dirt in the system, like what? So we would let it run and run and run, but it would never quite clear up. It was always like this off color tint. And then my wife started to get really frustrated because after living there for about a week, it was starting to stain all of our clothing. And she was like so frustrated. She's like, all the clothes are turning orange. She's like, what is going on? So, we kind of called the people in charge, like the management company in charge of the home. And we said, hey, this is happening. And they said, well, it's an older home. I don't know that there's anything we can do about it. They sent someone out to take a look. Nothing happened, right? So after about 2 weeks of being there, one of my daughters started to exhibit skin irritations, like lesions on her skin, where she would just get these open sores and they would be bleeding all the time. And we're like, this is weird. Like, what's going on? And then it started happening to me. I was getting these lesions all over my skin, and it would be just like sores, and they were open and they would just be bleeding. And I'm like, I said to my wife, something's not right. Like, what is going on? So she actually ended up calling the water district that was overseeing the water there. And it just so happened that their corporate office was like 2 hours away. So she demanded that they send someone out to check our water and to see what's going on. And so they did. And so this person came out like multiple times, ran water tests. They were cleansing, they were like, because of us, right? They were turning on the fire hydrants and letting them all drain. Like they were checking our pipes. They were checking the pipes throughout the neighborhood. There was all kinds of stuff. They dug up our yard. Like there was a ton of stuff going on. And basically what it came down to, they said, was this is just the way the water is. There's nothing we can do about it. According to our testing, it passes all regulations. And we're sitting here going, yeah, but we're like getting lesions on our skin. There's something not right. So I was like, well, we can't live like this. So we found another place, and we moved about 30 minutes away, and we rented an apartment. And in this time, like I said, for the first time I was on my own. And so my wife had just had a newborn. And so she could not help with the process of moving other than doing some packing. And so here I am. And of course, you know the way things work. You have to move in, you have to move out. There's all these deadlines. So basically we had 24 to 36 hours to rent a truck and move everything we had from a 2,200 square foot home to like a 900 square foot apartment. And it was the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. Because on top of that, someone in the neighborhood had recommended that we hire a couple of workers that they knew, which was fine. And these guys were definitely from God, because I could have never done it by myself. But there's like this stress involved with like, I don't know these people. And, you know, with the experience we had just had being broken into in our house, I'm like, are they going to try to kill me? You know, like while we're moving, because they're like riding in the moving truck with me. It was just this level of trust that I wasn't real comfortable with. Nonetheless, we got it done. Okay. And so we spent the next few months in that apartment. And it was just compounding stress upon stress upon stress. And then we realized, like, this is not working for us. We're too far from our family. This job is not working for us. Like, it just all became this perfect storm. So within the next few months, I resigned from that job, found a new job that was only about 30 minutes from where my family was then living, and was able to move there, and things got a lot better. I found a really good position with really great people who really cared, and we were in a much better neighborhood with no water problems, right? But I went through about 6 to 8 months of this level of stress I'd never experienced in my life, to the point where I was literally feeling sick. Like, it just was not good. And I was so overwhelmed by it because I didn't have all the answers. You know, it's moments like that when you really have to look at your faith. And I really had to depend on God, because I knew I was on a path of recovery. I knew I was on a path to get me and my family wherever it was that we needed to be. But it was a bumpy, bumpy road. So I finally settled in, started enjoying my job. We were enjoying the community we were in. Things were looking so much better. And then, out of nowhere, I started to experience a new health concern. In March of 2021, about 2 years from the surgeries, I started to develop some soreness in my neck underneath the area where I had my surgery. So, you know, it would come and go. Sometimes it was worse than others. Sometimes I would go days or weeks without even knowing it, and then it would all of a sudden kind of just show up. So I thought maybe I'd pulled a muscle. I thought maybe it's some scar tissue that I'm dealing with. So went to a chiropractor, had adjustments, didn't help. So after the chiropractor, I decided to go to my dermatologist, because I was like, hey, I had skin cancer before. I better just check this out. So he looked and he said, look, there's nothing I can see topically. There's nothing on the surface. He's like, but if you want, I can write you a recommendation to an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they might be able to see, if there's something going on internally. So I took that recommendation and I went to an ENT. So when I got to the ENT, he said that definitely I had a lymph node that was swollen, but there was no way that he would be able to know what was going on unless they took a biopsy. And I didn't like the word biopsy, because I don't like the idea of cutting and slicing and dicing, because I know in the world of cancer, it's not smart. But I went ahead and did it because, I needed to find out what was going on. What was the root of this? So in September of 2021, I went in and had a biopsy. And I will tell you, in my heart of hearts, I truly had put all this cancer, all the skin cancer, everything was behind me. I was eating perfectly healthy. I did not make mistakes in my diet. Like, I was literally staunch in what I did. I had lost all my cravings. I didn't even want sugar anymore. I didn't care about cheese. I didn't care about meat. Like, I was happy eating a whole food plant-based diet. I wasn't worried about it, and I was good with it. It wasn't this thing where I was like, as soon as this milestone happens, I'm going to go back and eat the way I used to. No, like, I realized it got me in the position I was in, and I never wanted to be back there again. So I had made that change. So I felt really good. And so in my heart, I was not worried about this biopsy, because I was like, this is behind me. So, maybe it's a pulled muscle. Who knows? We're just going to go in, just make sure there's no problems. So I remember the day in September when I got a phone call while I was at work. And, I'm really thankful, because at the time I had a principal who was my supervisor, who was one of the most, if not the most supportive people I've ever met in my life. A genuinely wonderful person. And I can't say enough great things about him. And so he knew my story very well. And so I had stepped out to take this call. And whenever I got the call, I was expecting them to say, we got the results back and everything looks good. Here's what you should do next. But the answer that I got was, your results came back positive. You have a basal cell tumor growing in your neck. We're going to need you to come in because we need to test your entire body. At that moment, I felt like everything was stripped out from beneath me. I felt like I had worked so hard to ensure good health. And I was literally punched in the gut, because now I got a diagnosis that was 100 times worse. I was now in stage 4 cancer, thinking that I was 100% healthy. I remember walking up to my principal and I told him that I got my test results back and that they weren't good. And he said, go ahead, take the day and do what you need to do. So I went and I sat in my car, and this hopelessness set in again. And I will tell you, I sat in that car and I wept for about 5 minutes. Because how am I going to tell my wife? I have 3 little kids at home. Like, this is the thing. This is the news that no one wants to hear and no one wants to tell. And I'm sitting on it right now with only one other person that knows. And I don't know how to process it. But what's amazing is, after that 5 minutes of distraction and confusion and really deep negative emotion, it was like God shined a light on me. And suddenly it just left. All of my despair, all of my despondency, all of my frustration, it was gone. And I said, you know what? Then I'm going to beat it. But I'm not going to die. Not from this. And I drove home. And I wasn't even worried about it anymore. It was like somehow supernaturally, and I'm so grateful, God it was like he flipped a switch in my brain. And it was like, you're either going to have hope and trust me, or you can go down this really dark path. And I didn't want to go down the dark path. So I chose hope. I chose hope. So now I've been given this diagnosis. I went to all kinds of testing. PET scans, CT scans, you name it. They were just trying to get to the bottom of everything. And what they discovered was that I had a tumor in my neck and I had 2 different lesions on my ribs. They weren't conclusive about the rib lesions, what they were, but they did take a biopsy and they did find that it contained the basal cells. So what had basically happened was the basal cells had traveled through my body and landed in these 3 strategic places, in my neck and 2 of my ribs, and they began to multiply. This is so rare. This only happens in 3% of skin cancer cases that are basal cells. So, me being the rare person that I am and being in the elite 3%, I now was looking at a stage 4 metastatic cancer diagnosis. You know, stage 4 is such a scary word. It's a scary phrase because people think that means like once you get to stage 4, you're almost dead. Like stage 1, we just found out. Stage 2, this is not good. Stage 3, you're getting bad. And stage 4, you're fixing to die. That's not at all what it means. That was just like completely misunderstanding on my part. Stage 4 means that it has moved to more than one location in your body. Okay. So whenever I realized that, it gave me a little bit of peace because it wasn't a timeline. It was just a descriptor for locations, right? You know, you begin to process, what am I going to do? In my heart, I did not want to have surgery. I did not want to do chemo. I did not want to do radiation. And I knew that was what was coming for me. And I just had seen so many people go through it, and it never seemed to end well for them. I certainly realized there are people who have gone through these methods and it has turned out good for them. I just didn't know any. And at the time, I was just like, no, like I know this was from my diet. I was convinced of this. So I can't expect some drugs to fix it. So, you know, I start researching and figuring out like what's going on, like how is this happening? So in the process, we started really looking at alternative therapies. And one of the things, and if I could encourage you with anything, it's this. Everyone has cancer cells in their body. And the fact of the matter is that in a healthy body with a healthy immune system, your body recognizes those cancer cells and it destroys them on a daily basis. But with someone who has cancer, they really have a compromised immune system in which their immune system doesn't recognize the cancer cells and it doesn't destroy them, and therefore a tumor can begin to grow. And I tested that knowledge because I wanted to make sure I understood. So I went over and over and over to these teams of doctors, and I would ask every one of them the same thing. I would say, is my understanding of cancer correct? And if it is not, please correct me. And every doctor would say, yes, that's exactly right. You understand it correct. And so I would say to them, then you're talking about chemo, you're talking about radiation, you're talking about surgery, all these things are on the table. We don't know what we're going to do. But it seems to me that my problem is my immune system. And the doctors would kind of look at me like, almost like you're not supposed to know that, you know? And I would say, so what are you going to do to treat my immune system? Because that seems to be the problem. And that's what I'm concerned about. Like, I don't want to just do a therapy and maybe it's successful, maybe it's not, but then the root of the issue is not solved and it just comes back. Like, we got to fix this thing. So what can you do to help me to heal my immune system? And time after time, oncologist after oncologist, specialist after specialist, they all told me the same thing. They said this, and this is basically a quote. Well, that's actually more Eastern medicine. And we do Western medicine. And what our research shows is that chemo, radiation, and surgery are the most effective forms to treat cancer. So that's what we do because we base it on our research. Now, I want to pause and I want to highlight a phrase. Our research. You know, the research that's done in the American medical journals. They didn't say worldwide research. You know, there are other developed nations that practice medicine very well, and they have a very high success rate of health. America tends to have a low success rate of health. We have a lot of quote unquote health care, but we don't necessarily see a lot of people improving conditions. So things were not sitting well with me because they basically told me, like, we're not willing to treat your immune system. That's not what we do. So I started out this mission of, like, I've got to find someone who can help me with my immune system. So we started to do research and found lots of centers, some in America, some in Mexico, some in different places. And they claim to be immunity therapy centers. And this was appealing to me because I knew, that's kind of my problem. So in the midst of all this, started to find a place, I think it was in Cancun, Mexico, that was pretty renowned for doing some immunity therapy. The problem was it was extremely expensive. And we didn't really have those kinds of funds. And of course, insurance wouldn't be able to do anything for that. So got a little bit discouraged with that, but my wife was very persistent and she kept researching. And finally, she got in touch with a cancer advocacy center out of California. I don't remember the name of it. But basically they were telling her, we have some recommendations for you. And they wanted to talk to me. So I got on the phone and I talked to them. And we told them about the one we were looking at. And they said, we do actually recommend that center. It is very expensive. They said, but we have something that we actually recommend even more. And they told me about a therapy center in Tijuana, Mexico. And it was a fraction of the cost. It was still expensive, but it was a fraction of the cost. And they actually had a little more cutting edge therapies that they were doing there to treat the immune system. So really started looking into it and thinking, this might be an option for me. So in the middle of this, I'm still, discussing with the people at the cancer center here in Houston. And after about 2 months of them meeting and me doing tests and whatever, they finally came up with a protocol. And by this time, I had made up my mind, if I don't like their protocol, then I'm going to shoot for this center in Mexico. So the protocol was to put me on a chemo pill. They didn't want to do radiation, which I was thankful for. They didn't want to do surgery, which I was grateful for. But they wanted to put me on a chemo pill. And so the oncologist that was going to be overseeing me at that point, he was, the number one oncologist for basal cell carcinoma that had manifested internally. So, great, I've got the guy. And he pulled me in and he said, okay, we're going to give you this chemo pill and you're going to take it for 18 months. And immediately I'm like, 18 months? That's a year and a half. And he said, it'll take 18 months for us to know if it's effective. I don't know if right now the bells and the whistles and the red flags are jumping at you like they were at me. But to me, this was not a very feasible protocol. He goes, here's the side effects that you're going to deal with. And he hands me a piece of paper with a page long of side effects. Everything from nausea, dizziness, standard things, to severe things like death. I was going to become radioactive. That's literally what the paper said. So much so that it said, do not conceive during this period or the likelihood of your child dying is going to be very high. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how in the world can I think if this medicine is so powerful to kill a baby in the womb by having contact with me, what's it going to do to me? And this just wasn't sounding right. And then he added insult to injury, if you will. He threw more flames or more, fuel on the fire. And he said, now I need you to understand that after 18 months, we'll determine if it's effective. But effective really means that the cancer doesn't grow. Wait a minute. I thought the goal was to get rid of the cancer. No, effective means it doesn't spread. He said, and in fact, at some point, the cancer is going to work its way around this drug and we will have to start all over. That's what I was given. To which I said, absolutely not. And I think I kind of shocked him. And he pleaded with me. He said, if you were my relative, if you were my brother, I would tell you the exact same thing. I really recommend you do this. And I'm like, there's no way. This is going to kill me. I knew it in that moment. This is going to kill me. So I left, and my parting word to him was this. I said, well, I'm considering maybe some alternative therapies, and I found an immunity center in Mexico, and they do this. And I was really hopeful and really excited about it. And have you ever seen a kid with a balloon and someone just pops it? Yeah, that's what happened. So I said, this is what I'm thinking about. So I may try this first and see what happens. The man looked at me, opened the door, and laughed and said, let me know how that works out for you, and walked out. And I never saw him again. And I'm glad. It doesn't matter if I offend people along the way. I have to do what's right for me when it comes to my health. I have to walk by faith. I have to trust in God, not in what man can offer me. So I made the decision that day to pursue alternative therapies. And in 2022, I went, over the course of a year, I went 3 different times to Mexico. The first 2 times I went for 3 weeks of therapy, and then the third time I went for 6 weeks of therapy. And in that time, my tumor shrunk by 75%. And here I am today on a path to recovery. I am still walking this out. It's not 100% gone. Why? Because my body is not 100% healed. I'm not 100% balanced. But you know what? I did not get cancer in a day. And I cannot be disappointed or discouraged if it's not healed in a day. This is a healing journey. But it's my experiences that I've had and the path that I've walked that's brought me to this podcast. You see, I have experienced firsthand that healing comes in all different forms and fashions. And my goal is not to bash conventional or Western medicine. It's not to depend on Eastern or alternative therapies. It is to say that there is more to healing than what we're sometimes told. And each person has to walk that journey out, whatever it looks like. But I want to encourage and inspire people to walk by faith and not by sight, to trust in what you know you need to do for you and your family. I still have some healing to go. The reason I shared the story of my crazy year where we did the moving and we had all these crazy events and tragedies and all this was to share that I went through extremely high levels of stress. And what I've learned is that just as my nutrition was bad, the stress I was undergoing was also toxic. And I was becoming toxic day by day by day. And I truly believe that is what spawned or triggered a growth of cancer in my body. So I am on a mission, not only to see myself completely whole and completely healed, but to inspire, to educate, to motivate, and encourage others to do the same. On this podcast, I am going to dedicate and devote my time to sharing alternative therapies, to sharing nutritional tips and information and hacks. I am going to find people that have come against the odds, that have overcome the biggest obstacles in their health battles and live to tell about it. And I am going to expose and share their stories. Why? Because you need to hear them. Because we need to band together. We need to rally together and say, our bodies can heal themselves if we're given the right conditions. And sometimes all that takes is information. It takes education. It takes inspiration and motivation. And it takes us dying to old habits that have gotten us where we are and embracing a new lifestyle that focuses in not on the cares of the world and not on the rat race, but it focuses in on the things that matter most: our lives, our families, our health, our nutrition. I thank you for listening to this podcast and listening to my story. And as the weeks unfold, I want to share with you the things I'm learning, and I want to bring guests on that can teach us all. And most importantly, I want to share stories of hope and renewal and healing. So thank you for listening to this podcast. This has been episode 2, prologue part 2. I hope that you continue to listen to this podcast and learn. I would love to hear your story. Feel free to connect with me on social media at Healing Conspiracy. Also, would love you to send me emails. Would love to hear from you. If you know someone whose story needs to be told, you can contact me at chris@healingconspiracy.com. And lastly, make sure that you follow this podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel where there's going to be exclusive content. And also, if you're listening on KFred Radio, you can listen to this show every Tuesday through Friday at 9:30 a.m. Central. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to being with you again next time. Remember, seek for the truth, and it will set you free.